All right, now it is my pleasure to introduce your first speaker of the day, Dr. Jessica Lautz, Deputy Chief Economist and Vice President of Research for the National Association of Realtors. Dr. Lautz has been with the National Association of Realtors since 2007, and the core of her research focuses on trends for both NAR, side note, it is not NAR, it is NAR. So, side note, she is an in-demand speaker and often provides commentary on the real estate market for major media outlets and has even testified before Congress on behalf of NAR. Dr. Lautz is passionate about giving back and makes positive impact serving as a volunteer for numerous noteworthy organizations. Please join me in giving a Texas CCAR warm welcome to Mrs. Jessica Lautz.
Thank you. Hello, how is everyone this morning? So I'm first up, and I love being first up because one, I drink a lot of coffee, but two, I'm gonna just inundate you with so much data. Are you guys excited to hear data first thing in the morning? Yeah, okay, a lot of excitement in the room. All right, so as we're looking at the real estate market today, we've closed out 2024, we're into 2025, which seems a little surreal to me. I will tell you that we do not have year-end data for 2025 or 2024 yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a comparison to 2023 where we have annual data, but I'm going to give you a lot of very recent data too. So it's not the entire year, but I'll tell you, you all know that 2023 and 2024 looked a lot alike when we look at the real estate market. Sales volume, very similar, home prices still going up. The good thing is that interest rates came down. And so we're going to talk about all of these factors here. When we look at the real estate market, year-end 2023, but I could say year-end 2024 as well, we know that the sales volume last compared to 1995. So you've heard how long I've been at NAR, forever. And we can pretend that I'm 21, but I'm not. In fact, I'm an elderly millennial, a geriatric millennial is what the media is calling us. Have you all heard this term? It's just gross. But here we are. So when I think of 1995, I tend to think that that was yesterday, but it turns out that my hot 1995 Friday night would have been hitting up Blockbuster or Hollywood Video. So that was a while ago. It really, when we think about that time period, I want to put it in that context because that was really this pre-technology time period that we're living in now. Why do I want to do that? Just to level set and say, during that time period, we have gained 70 million more Americans, but we're still having the same level of home sales volume. So obviously there's a problem, and that really comes down to inventory. We're starting to see more inventory come into the market, but we know that we are still short a lot of housing inventory. So if we look at that nationwide, there's estimates that range quite a bit, but between 5 million homes, 6 million homes that we are missing in the US right now. So I know that the South has more new construction. I know that your area has more new construction, but is that new construction actually fitting the needs of Americans that are here, right? So this is what we're looking at too, is the disconnect between the type of units that are coming on and also the people who are buying homes and the demand that's there. We have a very divided housing market. We have a lot of haves and a lot of have-nots. We have a lot of homeowners who have gained a lot of housing equity, and I'll show you that data as home prices continue to go up, and that's the positive. But on the downswing, we know that first-time home buyers, new home buyers who are trying to enter are really desperately trying to get there. So as we look at mortgage interest rates, let's level set on a couple of things here. So one, mortgage interest rates have been coming up in recent weeks, even with the Fed's announcement of lowering the Fed funds rate. It's not necessarily a one-for-one, so we're not seeing as close a tie as perhaps we have seen historically when we see that movement there. The movement that we are seeing has been moving up, and in fact, yesterday new inflation numbers were released, CPI numbers. We actually saw that tick up as well. As we move into this year, we are expecting, this is your first forecast number, we are expecting that interest rates are going to stay in the 6% range. So we're not expecting that they're going to move much further. NAR actually does their own forecast summit. We bring in a lot of chief economists from across the country, and every single one of them said, yes, this is the one thing we can all agree on, is that mortgage interest rates are expected to be in that 6% range. No one's really expecting a steep drop into 5%, or actually even moving up past into that 8% range that we had seen in 2023. Why do I give that range? Because as we look at 2023, that's where we saw that recent peak in mortgage interest rates. It became really unaffordable for a lot of people to purchase, and we actually saw a dip in home sales activity in that time period. So it was October of 2023. They have come down. We're seeing them mid-6s right now. And I think it's important for consumers who are out there to know that there is no expectation for them to drop. So as you're talking to consumers, if they're saying, I'm just going to wait till rates are back at 2.5% again, you'll know that that's not going to happen. But I think relaying that to the consumer to really say, well, home prices are expected to grow, but rates are expected to stay the same. So there's really no added benefit if you are financially able, if you are stable, to put that pause on that home sale transaction. Now, the other thing that I hear a lot from realtors is, well, when I purchased a home, rates were 18%. I was in New Jersey yesterday and I heard that, and I didn't want to then pick on them on the stage, and so I didn't call them out by name, certainly. But also, I think it's good to level set too that home prices have grown dramatically, and so we're not looking at home prices when rates were at 18%. So I like to watch bad movies, so y'all Ghostbuster fans, the original Ghostbusters? So I watched that recently, and it really was striking because when they financed the firehouse to go fight ghosts in New York City, that rate was like 19%. Now, I don't think that that's a good business model, so they probably didn't get the best rate possible, but I do think it's possible to put things into context for consumers so that they can understand that's a really high rate. That's not something you're going to see right now, but also we know that home prices have grown too, because it's just kind of ick if you just make that comparison repeatedly. Right? That's the new word that we're saying. Okay, so as we look at home prices, I want to give you a couple of things here. So one takeaway from this chart is that we're looking at new home prices versus existing prices. And always there was a price premium for new homes. You have all the bells and whistles. You have the green features. You have the cool countertops and the great appliances. You don't have to make replacements on this home once you're in. What we've seen in recent months is actually those prices are right there. They're about the same. And it matters on a monthly basis which one is actually more expensive. And so we're seeing a lot of parity in that sale right now when we look at both new homes and existing homes. So why is that happening? Well, one, we don't have enough inventory nationwide. So if we actually look at the offers on homes and what people are offering, about 15% of homes in the last month, even in the dead of winter, when the home market is slower, we actually saw that people paid more than that home price that was listed. Now, of course, there's pricing strategy that goes into that. Some people may be doing that intentionally, pricing that home low, so you do have a bidding war on that property, but we know that those beautiful homes, the ones that have a lot of interest in them, are moving more than the asking price. The second thing that's happening that's making this parity between new homes and existing homes is that we're actually seeing that new homes are getting a little smaller. So if you remember the McMansion days that we saw back in the 90s where these homes were ginormous, official word there. But as we look at that huge structure of 2,500 square feet or even bigger on a nationwide scale, that is shrinking. And so as we see that coming down, the price per square foot also coming down and showing that parity. Now for new homes, certainly some home builders, not all home builders, but some home builders are able to actually provide some benefit there for mortgage interest rates, buying down that rate. That's an attractive offer as well, but something to think about. As we look at your home prices, just giving you there the entire MSA, what I will say is y'all are local experts. You know your zip code, you know your niche, you know your home prices, but I just want to give you a few comparisons here of local data too. So what I think is really important, and I've alluded to it already, is these home price gains, the winners versus the losers in today's housing. Well, the haves versus the have-nots. We're not going to call them losers. We're going to call them, they're really trying and have goals. So as we look at home price gains here, within your state, I think this is really striking. If there is anyone who's sitting on the sidelines who's saying, I'm just going to be a renter, I think this is the best plan for my future. This is a great chart to show them, because I think it's so striking to see that from the pandemic months, after we think about Q1 of 2020, that was so long ago at this point, versus if we look at the most recent data that we have, and we'll have new data here very soon for the last quarter, but nearly a 50% home price increase over that time period. That is a huge asset that Americans are holding on to. And as we think about the ability to put down a very large down payment or even purchase a home with all cash, we're seeing a lot of that activity because of current homeowners really holding on to this financial asset, holding on to it and being able to make a trade to that ideal location. But again, those who are renters really being left out from this, those who are doubling up from family, not having that financial asset as well. Again, different places of the country, certainly higher, and in some pockets and neighborhoods and zip codes that y'all work on, certainly going to see higher price appreciation. Again, in New Jersey yesterday, seeing more than 60% price appreciation, really striking in that area. You can see that states are people moving to, and I'm going to skip that statement because I'm going to go back to that. All right, so qualifying income to purchase a home. So we talked about the two big things, right? So mortgage interest rates, home prices going up. The expectation for home prices going up. We have the expectation that home price growth will happen this year. We will see continual growth. That is our expectation for the market. As we look at the qualifying income, that has also gone up. The recent decrease in that has to do with a recent decrease in mortgage interest rates, because when they were at 8%, we could see actually the qualifying income was the worst that we have seen, we've ever collected back to the 1980s. It was very, very difficult to be able to purchase a home when rates are at 8%. Now that qualifying income has come down, in your area a little bit lower, so we can see it's at 95,000, but 95 versus 100, I think we can say that's pretty close. As we look at this, I want to give this huge caveat with this chart. This is with 20% down. We know that most home buyers are not putting 20% down unless they're a repeat buyer in the market, unless they've lived in their home for a while and could really offset that mortgage interest rate or just want that freedom. So that's the big caveat, is that for that first-time home buyer taking advantage of low down payment programs, their qualifying income needs to be even higher than this. So that's the big caveat on this chart. When we look at the income of successful home buyers, what we can see in the last 2 years actually, is that the successful income has actually jumped by $26,000 for first-time home buyers. This is really striking because it does not mean that every first-time home buyer got a raise of $26,000. That would be phenomenal if they did, but what it means is that the typical home buyer who's entering into the market just has a higher income. So as we think about today's first responders, our teachers, our people that we desperately need within our local communities, they're really being priced out of homeownership. And we can see this really reflected in this chart. So I live right outside of DC. I work in the DC office at NAR. In fact, 2 days ago when I went into the office, my husband dropped me off, and the office is so close to the Capitol that we were actually driving through the inauguration gates, and we could see, like, this is the yellow gate. And I was like, okay, well, let's get out of DC now because it's going to get very crowded very quickly. So that was really interesting to see. I will be there over the weekend regardless. But anyway, I digress. In the DC area, there's a lot of transient community. There's a lot of renters, there's a lot of homeowners. In our community, it's very close to the Pentagon. It was actually built for World War II housing. It's a historical district, which is very cool. There's 3,000 townhouse and apartment units. Telling this long story because our neighbors are in this scenario where it's a first responder and it's a teacher, and they are desperately trying to enter into homeownership. And as they have these conversations, they're asking about what the expectations are for the market. Where are home prices going to go? When is the bottom going to fall out of the market? And as these ask these questions, I know that you as practitioners are getting them, because if I'm getting them in my kitchen on Christmas Eve, y'all are getting them. So I'll tell you that rates are expected to be where they are. They're expected to be in the 6% range. Home prices expected to go up. The bottom not expected to fall out, because there is no bottom here. As we look at the housing demand, and I'm going to show you a lot of data on this, there's a lot of demand for fewer properties. So we're not expecting that there's going to be distressed sales in the future. Right now, we're seeing it jump around 1% to 2% a month of realtors working with distressed sellers. When we look at CoreLogic's data, when we look at the mortgage bankers' data, so CoreLogic has a figure, mortgage bankers has 90 days delayed in paying on a mortgage payment. They're seeing single digits as well. So we're just not seeing that type of activity. So it's a really depressing story, and I pour her another glass of wine and I play with her kids, but I don't have a good housing story to tell our renters who are first responders, except for thank you for working on Christmas and keeping us all safe. Okay, moving on. Inventory. So as we look at inventory, I will say that this is becoming a brighter spot. Certainly in your area, already heard from a couple of realtors this morning that you're starting to see more inventory. This is good because you have a lot of people moving here. As we look at inventory, though, to level set with you all nationwide, we are still below the inventory levels of February of 2020. So when we think about that time period, moving past February of 2020, when interest rates dropped down to that 2.5%, 3% range, and the housing market went completely bananas, and home buyers came in, and home builders retracted their activity because they couldn't find employees and they had a hard time with supply, and they really were contracted at the same time, we know that inventory really shrunk. So we're starting to get more inventory. Home builders, as we move into 2025, are expected to increase their activity. Why? Because interest rates are coming down. They have to borrow to build. So we are expecting that more home building activity, bringing new units in. The second big factor is the lock-in effect of mortgage interest rates. So yes, there's a lot of homeowners. The vast majority of homeowners who have a mortgage under 4%. That being said, you can't time a new baby or a marriage or a divorce, certainly not a divorce, to a mortgage interest rate. So we have to keep that in mind, that people move when life changes happen. People move when a grandbaby is born and they want to move close to that grandbaby. They don't move when the mortgage interest rate moves from 6.7 to 6.5%. That's just not a calculation that they're likely doing. So as we see this movement happen for life changes, we likely will see more inventory happen. We likely will see this freeing up of the housing gridlock that has been very much a problem. All right, so back to the haves. We can see that the housing equity has allowed a lot of people, and I'm going to give you this chart and the next chart hand in hand here. And as we look at this chart, I am really showing you that for repeat buyers, we are at an all-time high of repeat buyers who paid all cash for their home. It is nearly a third of repeat buyers who are paying all cash. So a lot of people who are moving and relocating to different areas around the country, a lot of homeowners who are sitting on that housing equity. But I want to pull out the stat here too, that's under the radar perhaps, but it's the 1 in 10 first-time home buyers who are paying all cash for their home. That is really striking to me. So how in the world are they doing that? And I'm going to show you this next chart too, and this really goes hand in hand. We can see down payments also went up in the last year. Again, not a surprise as we think about repeat buyers, but how in the world are these first-time home buyers doing that? So what we saw this year for today's first-time home buyers is that they're relying on savings to pull down their down payment or to make this all cash purchase. The second one is the bank of mom and dad. So it's a really good bank if you can get it. Good loan terms on that bank, right? Pretty forgivable loans often. So great bank. The third one is that we're seeing financial assets being used. So people using stocks, cryptocurrency, thinking about those types of financial assets. So this is talking about a first-time home buyer who actually even has those to be able to rely on them, to use them coming into the market. And that's just as popular as the bank of mom and dad today. And the other thing that we saw come up in the data this year, and this is the highest we've ever seen it, is inheritances. So perhaps waiting for that uncle that they've never met, we're gonna go with that because otherwise it's too emotional, for them to pass and then passing on that wealth to junior. Now, I don't think that that's necessarily a great savings plan to tell consumers, just wait for your rich uncle to die, but this is what we are seeing in the data. Now, there was this expectation that we're going to have this silver tsunami that's going to happen. We've heard this term, that there is going to be this massive generational transfer of wealth. It's going to happen from boomers to millennials, and they're all going to have the homes to live in. I am going to disprove that in just a short period here, but what we are seeing is a very, very slow trickle of that behavior. So it's not a silver tsunami. It's like the faucet is broken, slow trickle coming in. All right, so let me give you a few slides here. Positive job growth. Your state is really booming when it comes to positive job growth. When we look at this, there is a lot of companies who are attracted to your state. In fact, recently our economists were like, ooh, let's make this really pop out here. They need to be green because it is so outperforming all of the other states here on this map. So as you see this, you know that you have relocation activity here. Employers are attracted to this area and they are coming. As we look at the mobility here, the migration trends, what we're seeing here too, anything in blue is where people are moving to. Orangish color, people are moving out of. So you can see strong relocation trends here. When we think about this metro area, DFW area, we know that a lot of people are very, very attracted to coming here. I know that other cities like Austin got all the headlines and you all just kind of slid under the radar perhaps of the press, not really, but very attractive place to move to. As we look at that, you can see that migration trends still happening. What I want to pull out though is why. Why are people moving? So certainly jobs are one of them, but the number one reason to move today is actually to be close to friends and family. That's the number one reason to move. So when we think about today's home buyers, I'm going to show you their age data, but it really is a choice. It is someone moving because they want to be close to their support system. This is a change coming out of COVID. This is a change in mindset where people want their people close to them, and they have the freedom to do that. And some of that also has to do with remote work trends. Because if we look a decade ago, about half of recent home buyers said, ooh, I need to be close to my workplace. That's a top priority for me. That's what I need to be when I think about where I'm moving to. Today, it's about a third. And some of that has to do with longer commute times. You have the ability to just come in maybe once a month or once a week. And so you're willing to do that 2-hour commute. I recently just saw on Facebook someone still doing that, saying, you know what, I decided I can do this commute once a week and I can move further out. And I thought, wow, that's a 2020 trend revived, but here we are. People are still doing that and still saying that. One of the things that I think is interesting though, is when we look at location, suburbs, small towns, always going to be the most popular places to live. And in fact, we're seeing affordability play a really big role here. So even as we look at young adults, they are more likely to purchase in small towns than they are to purchase in urban centers. But this year, we actually saw a rebound in urban centers. It's at the highest level that we saw in the last decade. So we are seeing people are moving back into urban centers. But who is it? It may not be that young worker who's going into the office every day. We're actually more likely to see it's actually retirees who are moving into urban centers. So thinking about things like amenities, an apartment place or a condo, townhouse environment where they don't have as much upkeep, where they can age in place perhaps a little easier, taking the elevator down. So this is something that we are seeing in the data. There's also something to be said for those beautiful, nice new luxury units being built, being at a high price point. And so those young adults may be buying that single family house that's a little older, it is older, that needs a little work, that needs that elbow grease, good return on profit there, but also a return on investment of that property, but also thinking about just someone moving into a place and buying what they can afford. All right, so let me talk about some demographic changes here. I think this is super fascinating. I'm gonna give you one depressing chart and then I'm gonna bring it back up, okay? Are you guys ready? Okay. I mean, hopefully it hasn't all been depressing. I mean, I know it's early, but let's go. Okay, so First-time home buyers. When we look at first-time home buyers, we can actually see that it is at the lowest level that we've ever seen in our data. So dating back to 1981, when we first started collecting it, this is the lowest level of first-time home buyers. So I've already told you they're higher income, they're wealthier. I'm also going to show you that they're older. When we look at high water marks here, we can see that 50% mark. Any of you work when the first-time home buyer tax credit happened in this environment? The housing market went completely crazy at that time period. There was plenty of supply to go around, and a lot of first-time home buyers came into the market. Since that time period, we have never been near the historical average, which is 40% of the market being first-time home buyers. So we have been way below that. But seeing it at 24%, I think, is pretty striking. So we talked about affordability, we talked about inventory, but there's also factors outside of the housing market too, right? So if we think about inflation, paying more at the grocery store, paying more for insurance, paying more for everything that you need to buy, gas to fill up the car. Rent is a big driver of why inflation was even high. So all of those factors are going to be holding back that first-time home buyer for being able to save for a down payment. The other one that we are seeing too is student loan debt. We've seen that consistently, and student loan payments during this time period resumed. So we had seen them lower in the data when they were paused, and then they went right back up when people had to start making that on-time payment again. So as we see this is a huge hurdle. If I'm going to give you a positive here, a silver lining, is that the youngest adults, Gen Zers, are starting to, I think, learn from all the mistakes of our geriatric millennials who said college, 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 more college, let's do another degree. And so as they learned from our mistakes there, they're starting to rethink that education plan and really what is the return on investment of this degree. All right, so this is my favorite nerd chart. Every nerd who's out there has a favorite chart. This is my favorite chart. Okay, are you guys ready? Okay, all right. So we got Gen Alpha. We got the little kiddos born in the last couple of years. There's a new generation in the last 2 weeks, but I have not put them on the chart yet because it's literally 2 weeks of data. So we're just going to leave them off right now. Then the bars get shorter as we hit to the silent generation. You can see there's fewer of them because how my understanding of the world works, and because I have a microphone, I can say it, is that people become ghosts or they go to heaven. So the bars get shorter, okay? All right, nothing. Okay, you guys are like, wow, she is weird. Okay, she gives us bad movies and like bad anecdotes. Can she give us anything here? Okay, so in the middle of the chart, we've got the millennial generation. It is represented in the blue. It is the biggest generation in the country today. If you can pull out there the red line, that is a median age of 38 years old. That is the typical age of a first-time home buyer today. If we look back at this 40 years ago, the typical age of a first-time home buyer was 28. So on a personal level, obviously that's going to mean lost housing wealth. That's a decade of missing out of all those housing gains that we saw the haves have. It also is probably going to mean less moves on the table, because if you're 38 years old and your intention is you're towards your peak earning years, you're getting into your career at least, we'll give you that, you're probably going to stay in that home for a while. You may have your family situation kind of set at that point. Whether you're partnered or not partnered, kids in tow or not, that's probably where you're going to be. And so as we look at that, that's probably not a growing family, for instance, someone who has to quickly move for a new school district, someone who's looking for that quick trade up. So we're probably missing that move in that decade of time period. What I think is really important to note, though, is if we look past that, you can see a boom-ette in the data. It's late 20s, early 30s. Those young adults are putting a lot of pressure into the housing market right now. They're desperately trying to live independently, perhaps independently from your home, and move out. If they're doubling up from you, look for a rental unit, look for a home to purchase. So this is where we really need more inventory. So remember I talked about the silver tsunami and how a lot of economists and folks were saying, we don't need to build more housing because boomers are just going to die and they'll leave all their homes. They'll become ghosts, okay? We'll put it in nicer words. They'll become ghosts and they'll leave all their homes to young adults and transfer all that generational wealth and we'll be A-okay. So I've heard this argument, this counter argument that we don't need to build more housing because of that reason. But if we look at this, what I want to pull out here too is the yellow, second biggest generation in the US. At 61 years old, that is the median age of a repeat buyer in this country at 61. Why is that important? Well, if we look at this 4 decades ago, we would say the median age of a repeat buyer in this country was 36. Okay, so we cannot look to that 61-year-old to leave that property anytime soon. Bear with me here, but we're just gonna do a little math. It's gonna be really simple math, okay? So when I look at that 61-year-old, they're saying that their expectations to hold on to that property are about 15 years. So if we add 61 plus 15, we're getting 76. They're aging in place. They're not leaving that property. So one, does our housing stock actually support that? No. We tend to have older housing stock in the US that is not really capable for that. My husband, who I call him an old man, but he's only a few years older than me, but since I'm a geriatric millennial, he's a Gen Xer, so he'll deal with that. He just had a hip replacement, and I learned very quickly that our old place does not work for walkers. It does not work for that at all. The good thing is he has a very high pain tolerance, so he was off that real quickly. But when we think about stairs and places, when we think about single level living, when we think about the intent of Americans, Harvard University actually estimates that just 3% of homes in the US are actually okay to age in place. 3%. Yeah, so that's a problem. I'll leave that with y'all. Okay, so Gen Xers, I've skipped. Do y'all want to hear about Gen Xers? You're used to being ignored. You're like totally fine with that. Okay, all right. So let me give you, you want to hear about, yeah? Okay. So Gen Xers, it's the little generation. It's wedged between these two massive generations. They are not participating in any of the memes. There's no jokes made about them at all because we're just blaming millennials and we're blaming boomers for everything. So let's talk about Gen Xers a little bit. I do think that they're pretty interesting when we look at the housing market. They purchased their first home likely during the boom years. They may have lost that property or been underwater in that home, but they're okay. They financially rebounded, like they're doing fine. So all estimates are they have financially rebounded. They've come back into homeownership. They're about a quarter of home buyers overall today. They are in their peak earning years. They do need a bigger home. And the reason why is they have kids in tow. They have kids over the age of 18 who they can't get rid of. They also have aging parents. So they're the new sandwich generation. So we used to see boomers as the sandwich generation. It has shifted to Gen Xers. We are also seeing that millennials are also in this scenario as well. So older millennials, geriatric millennials are starting to be in this scenario. So as we look at this, that's a lot of family pressure there for these Gen Xers trying to find a big enough home to accommodate everyone, thinking about perhaps accessory dwelling units, thinking about perhaps new builders are actually attaching an apartment that just doesn't have like a full kitchen in it, so it's safe for an elderly relative to really live there, but also perhaps could be a rental unit. Lots of scenarios here where that could work. But again, does our housing stock support it? All right, so multi-generational homes, they are hitting an all-time high. I think this is fascinating. I don't think this is a trend that's going away anytime soon. I think it's here to stay, and we are continuing to see this move up. Again, families supporting each other in a different type of way, really coming out of the pandemic. Number one reason to move, be close to friends and family. Well, if they're not down the street, maybe they're in your house. Number one reason to do this is for an elderly relative. Number two is cost savings and affordability. So pooling incomes together so you can buy a bigger home, better area, where you want to be. All right, so we do have a drop in marriage rates in this country. So if we look back at the 1960s, 70% of American adults were married. Today, just half of American adults are married. So this has dropped quite a bit. First-time home buyers, but I could show you any generation. I could show you any little data cut here. I'm going to see the same trend. So looking at just first-time home buyers, what I want to pull out is just half of first-time home buyers are actually married today. It's dropped off a lot. We have seen a huge growth in single women as home buyers. Anyone work with a single woman in the last couple of years? Yeah, huge growth there. A quarter of first-time home buyers are single women. So really investing in home ownership. Single men, the data has just been flat. Like over the last 40 years of us collecting it, really not much movement here at all. What I think is fascinating to pull on that single women thread is that they have been outperforming since 1981. It's only been 50 years since women could even have a bank account or credit card in their own name, let alone a house. So really fascinating here. When we are looking at this data, to what we can see is that unmarried couples and roommates also coming up, so pooling incomes in different ways, thinking about housing affordability, saving for a down payment, and really entering homeownership that way as well. So Golden Girls phenomenon, perhaps a way to enter into homeownership. We are certainly seeing that as well for older adults, that support system around them, and being able to share a home. There is a baby bust. There's a lower birth rates in this country. People are having fewer kids than they have historically. But also, we know that there's more repeat buyers, and those repeat buyers are older, median age of 61 again. So we are seeing that there's fewer children under the age of 18 in a home. Perhaps over age of 18, but under the age of 18 going down in the data. As we see this, why does this matter? Well, I think it matters for a few reasons. One, location of the home. That could free up, you don't have to be in that A+ school district, you can go perhaps to that overlooked area. Option two, or reason two here, the number of bedrooms, the space that's actually needed within the home could be reduced as well. Thinking about affordability playing a role here. Third one, daycare is real expensive in this country. So suddenly a little more buying power for kids who are child-free households, having the ability perhaps to purchase a home where those who are paying in the DC area, $2,000 a month for one kid in daycare, that's quite expensive. So ranges obviously nationwide, but daycare can be very, very expensive. I think it's $800 is the median nationwide for one kid. So yeah. All right, much, much, much lighter note. Pets. Yes. Is anyone worked with a buyer who said, no, I have to have a yard or hardwood floors or yes. Okay. Yeah. Or I have to just buy because I adopted this dog from the shelter and turns out this is a 100-pound dog and now needs a lot more space. So I've even had a friend recently who had to buy a new car because the car that she had was too small for her very, very large dog who's bigger than both of her kids put together. So we are seeing this is a huge driver. It is a $147 billion business in the US is pets. So it is not a surprise that homeownership is coming into that at all. This is a tremendous amount of money that we are paying for our pets. Specialty vets, so they're not stressed out. Luxury vets. My cats do not go to that. They're fine. We also know that like people have private jets and amenity kits for their dogs so their fur doesn't get dried out too much. Okay, it's a fascinating phenomenon that we have in the US, but a lot of money put towards this. And I show you this data because it's only increasing. So I think it's fun, it's light, but it is a big driver that we are seeing out there. All right, I'm gonna give you two bad slides and then we're gonna go into the end of the presentation where we're gonna see positive slides. Okay, are you guys ready? You've been warned. Here we go. We're gonna go down again. So I'm going to talk about race and housing, but I'm going to flip it on its side, okay? So I'm going to talk about opportunities in the market as well. So let's talk about opportunities. So the big thing that I want to tell you is in the last decade, we actually have seen gains in net homeowners in the US. We have actually added more than 3 million new Hispanic Latino households who are homeowners. This is nationwide data. I'm going to give you state data in just a second. We've actually added 1.5 million new Asian households who are homeowners and nearly 1 million new Black households who are homeowners. This is really positive data. As we look at this too, the homeownership rate for Asian households and for Hispanic households actually hit an all-time high last year. That is something to be celebrated in the US that we actually did hit an all-time high. Absolutely positive gains in this direction. What I want to show you though is the homeownership rate overall in your state. So as we look at this, we can actually see the Asian and Hispanic homeownership rate. Asian homeownership rate is actually very, very close to the white homeownership rate. In a few years, we could actually see some parity there. Very close parity. As we see the Asian homeownership rate higher in your state than we do see in many other states around the country. What I do not want to gloss over though is that the Black homeownership rate is lower. When we look at this, I'm going to give you a few things that we've already talked about for first-time home buyers overall, but we do know that Black Americans hold a disproportionate amount of student loan debt. We also know that they pay a disproportionate amount in rent in comparison to their income and have a harder time paying down their student loan debt. So all of these things really trailing them from being able to enter homeownership, as well as a generational transfer of wealth that is not there as well. Those are just a few reasons. We have many, many, many other reasons why that happens, and we dig into this data deep in this report, but I wanted to talk about that. The other thing that I think is important to note, though, is that there is an opportunity for growth. When we look at the share of renters who can actually afford to purchase a home within your state, 45% of your Asian residents can afford to purchase a home, and we expect in the next 5 years there will be a growth in the typical home buyer age of people who are going to be able to afford a home in your state, and all of the largest shares of those are all among non-white Americans. So as we see that, we should see a growth in non-white homeownership within your state, and that is absolutely an opportunity to look at for growth here. When we look at the denial rate for mortgages, one of the things I do want to point out, though, is that the Black and Hispanic denial rate for mortgages continues to be higher across the country. In every state that I go to, in every group that I speak to, it is higher. So something to be thinking about as well. All right, so I told you we're going to talk about serious data, and now I'm going to bring it back up. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to do a challenge. This is my challenge to you, is to brag about yourself. So it was talked about a little bit in my intro that I like to give back. I like to volunteer. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to make birthday cakes for kids who are in really disadvantaged situations. So domestic violence shelters, homeless shelters. It's a nonprofit called Cake for Kids. So if any of you are bakers, I'm not a good baker. Like, I'm taking a cake box and adding milk so it tastes a little bit better, okay? So these are not pretty cakes. These are not, like, I'm not going to be on a TV show for these cakes. But someone gets to celebrate their birthday party. Like, this is awesome, right? It makes you feel good. Also, my husband really likes it because I make extra cake, and then he gets side cake, and then the neighbors get cake. There's a lot of cake. Okay, so cake's good, right? So, like, I just did something that's super uncomfortable to me, is to brag about myself, because, like, no one likes to do that, right? It's super uncomfortable. But I made jokes about it. It's good. My husband doesn't need more cake. Okay, so as we look at this, y'all volunteer way more than I do. Brag about yourself. 69% of you volunteer on a monthly basis. You are actually giving 8 hours of your month away to a community, to a nonprofit, to something that you care about. Brag about it. Tell your story. Other people are going to tell your story for you if you don't tell your story. So do tell your story. When we look at the volunteering among Americans overall, we're looking at about 20%. So y'all are volunteering way more than the typical American. You care about your community. You're invested in your community. That's why you do what you do. When we look at the buyer's use of agents, buyers absolutely need you. They want you. 9 in 10 are using you. This is data that was, yes, this is very, very, very good and very, very encouraging. As we look at this data, I think it's important to note this is before the settlement agreement, so before August 17th, but it's been in the media. We have all heard about it incessantly, the changes that have been had. But buyers still want you. They still need you. They want your representation. It's not just to find the right home. It's also help in negotiation, helping them through that process, helping them understand that process. For a repeat buyer in the market, they have held onto a home for 10 years before they go and do this again. And this housing market is not 10 years ago's market. So they have a lot to learn, and a lot to learn from your expertise. On the seller side, we also know that 9 in 10 sellers are using a seller's agent. They absolutely want you. They need help pricing their home. They need help finding that qualified buyer, marketing their home, really being able to sell this within a specific time frame. I also know that HGTV has ruined y'all's lives. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so some of the things that are coming up in the data are that they want someone to help fix up their home for sale, tell them that their home will look nicer than a place that they lived in for the last decade and haven't fixed anything in. So that's coming up in the data too, is that they do recognize that, the home staging, letting this home really shine to get the best price for it as well. One of the things that I think is really important to note here too, FSBOs, for sale by owner, is at an all-time low, just 6% in the last year, and half of those are to someone they know. That is an agreed upon transaction. That is not an open market FSBO. Really important to note, representation absolutely matters, and they want your help. The other two slides, the last two slides I'm going to give you here, are that when we look at the data, we know that homeownership matters. This is the biggest nest egg that most Americans have. I showed you the data from 2020 to today. 50% gain in home prices as that financial asset within your state. As we look at this too, we know the typical homeowner has $415,000 as net worth versus the typical renter at $10,000. That is a nest egg that someone can do a lot of things with, put their kids through college, remodel their home that they're planning on staying in, be able to really help their kids enter homeownership. Lots of things that could be done here, but that's a nest egg that renters don't have. And that's a spooky fact if I've ever seen one. As we look at the typical home sale in the US, we know that a lot is added into the economy, but for your state in particular, we are seeing $113,000. For every home that's sold, you are adding into your local economy. It is a huge multiplier effect. Whoops, that is my timer. But think of all the jobs that are involved. Think of everyone who really makes sure that that roof is over that buyer's head, that is a successful transaction, all of the people involved, then the movers and so on, the painters. If you are not following us on social, the last plug I will give, please do. We have a ton of nerds in our group and we're putting out all this information on a daily basis for you to use. So please do follow us along. Thank you.
Was that good information? Yes, that was awesome. So that was phenomenal. And I want to thank Dr. Lautz for coming all the way down from Washington, D.C. I think they got snow down there, coming all the way down here to Collin County. What an honor it is to have her. So what we're going to do is I need you all to fill out there should be a track completion roster for you to complete for your first hour of CE. If you will direct your attention to the screen. If you want to get CE, I'm going to need you to scan that. You're going to enter your information and hit submit. Once you've done that, I want to invite you to a special opportunity to go and meet the vendors. Now, as you go out and meet the vendors, be intentional with your conversations, and then go on social media and make your friends feel bad. Tell them you should have been here because Dr. Lautz was phenomenal. So once you've gone ahead and scanned your QR code, go ahead and step into the vendor area. We're going to take a quick break, and please be back in your seats by 10:15 because we're going to keep this party rolling. I'll see y'all in a few.